There is a specific suffocating kind of silence that fills a house when parents abandon their 8-year-old child in the dead of night to go on a family vacation without her. It is the exact agonizing silence my granddaughter was sitting in when she called me at 2 in the morning, sobbing so hard she was choking on her own breath. I am Harlan Vance. I am 63 years old, a retired family law attorney, and I live in the quiet, sticky swamplands of Waycross, Georgia. Welcome back to Dad's Real Revenge. Grab a cold drink, pull up a chair, and get comfortable because the people in this story had every chance to do the right thing, and they chose to be absolute monsters instead. But before we get into the heavy stuff, do me a quick favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments down below, what city are you watching this video from, and what time is it right now? I read every single one of them. Now let me tell you how my world got turned upside down. I had been asleep for maybe 40 minutes. It was that deep, heavy, dreamless kind of sleep you only earn after a brutal, bone-tiring week. Then my cell phone lit up the nightstand like a flare gun going off in a pitch-black room. Like I said, I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years of my life as a family attorney, dragging people through the mud of divorce and custody battles. Because of that, my body still flinches at unexpected middle of the night. Phone calls the exact same way a combat veteran flinches at a car backfiring. Nothing good comes through a telephone receiver at 2 a.m., not ever. It is always blood tears or bail money. The name glowing on the screen stopped my heart for exactly one beat. Harper. Not my son Travis, not his picture-perfect high-maintenance wife Shelby, my granddaughter. 8 years old, calling me from what I assumed was her own bed in their pristine cookie-cutter house in Valdosta, Georgia. It is one of those upscale, suffocating suburbs where the lawns are manicured too perfectly. The smiles are completely plastic, and everything looks absolutely fine until you take a magnifying glass to the rot underneath the floorboards. I snatched the phone before the second ring even finished. "Harper, baby, what is wrong?" The sound she made in response was not crying, not exactly. It was that hollow, agonizing wheeze a child makes when they have been crying for so long that they have completely run out of tears. Just a wet, shaking breath stuttering in her chest like a rusted car engine that just will not turn over. "Grandpa." She breathed my name like it was the absolute last word she had left in her vocabulary. I was already throwing the covers off, already reaching blindly for my wire-rimmed glasses, already running the cold, hard math in my head. That is an old, unbreakable habit. 31 years of family law teaches you to calculate the logistics of a disaster before your bare feet even hit the hardwood floor. Distance a grueling 6-hour drive through the pitch-black country backroads, or a 45-minute puddle jumper flight if I could even get one. Time 2 o'clock in the morning, reason unknown but severe enough to make an 8-year-old sound like she was dying inside. "I am here," I told her, my voice low and steady. "I am right here, sweetheart. Tell me what happened." They left. Just 2 words. It felt like someone had driven an ice pick straight into my ribs. I made her repeat them because my brain flat out refused to process the sentence. Who left baby? Daddy and Mama and Hunter. Her fragile little voice cracked right down the middle on that last name. Her brother's name. Well, her biological brother. Travis and Shelby's golden boy. Their flesh and blood, 11-year-old son who shared their sharp jawline, their loud laughter, and apparently their secret vacation itineraries. They went to Florida, to Disney World. I sat perfectly still on the edge of my mattress. The crickets outside my window were buzzing loud as a chainsaw, but all I could hear was the rushing of my own blood. "Say that again to me, Harper." "They went to Disney World," she whispered. She said it softer this time. She sounded humiliated, like being abandoned was somehow her own fault. "Without me. They said I had school on Monday and it did not make sense to take me, but Hunter does not have school either. And Grandpa," she broke. She just completely shattered into a million pieces right there on the line. "Why? Why did they not take me too? Here is what I need you to understand about me in that exact fraction of a second. I am a man who once cross-examined a sitting arrogant county judge without so much as blinking an eye. I once argued a complex case in front of an appellate court with a 102-degree fever sweating through my suit simply because my client was desperate and needed me there. I have looked mothers and fathers in the eye and delivered the kind of news that destroys a human soul. Custody lost, parental rights terminated, Children gone forever. And I have done all of it with a grip of iron and a voice as smooth as glass, because the job demanded I be a machine. But sitting in the dark in Waycross, Georgia, separated from my crying granddaughter by hundreds of miles of asphalt, I had to bite down on my own fist just to keep from screaming every filthy, furious thought burning through my brain. "You did not do a single thing wrong," I said instead, pouring every ounce of certainty I had into the phone. "Do you hear me, Harper? Not one single thing." "Then why?" "I do not know yet, baby, but I'm going to find out." I did not know it at that moment, but I'm going to find out was about to become the single most important vow I would make in the twilight years of my life. I hung up and immediately dialed my neighbor Earl Guthrie at 2:11 in the morning. Earl is 71 years old, a retired diesel mechanic rougher than sandpaper, and the only man walking this earth who treats a middle-of-the-night phone call like a casual afternoon porch chat. "Harlan," he grunted, picking up on the very first ring, sounding wide awake and sober as a judge. I have never understood that about the man. "I need you to watch the hound dog, Earl." Silence on the line, then a gravelly, "How long?" "I do not know. A few days, maybe a hell of a lot more." "That little granddaughter of yours?" he asked. I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yeah. I will be on your porch in 10 minutes for the spare key." That is Earl Guthrie for you. He did not ask a single damn question I did not want to answer. I have known him for 22 years, and that stubborn old mule has never once minded his own business, except for the exact moments when it truly mattered. Those are the rare friends you keep until you are in the dirt. I booked a flight on my smartphone while I was still standing in my bedroom in my sweatpants. A 6:15 departure out of the nearest regional airport, connecting and landing in Atlanta at 7:02 in the morning. Yes, I am well aware it is barely even a real flight. It is essentially a ridiculously overpriced, glorified bus ride through the clouds where they throw a bag of stale pretzels at your head. But I was not about to drive 6 hours straight in the dead of night. I'm 63, not 30. The discs in my lower back made that executive decision a long time ago. Before I grabbed my duffel bag, I did something I had not done since I retired. I walked down the hall to my dusty home office, yanked open the bottom left drawer of my heavy oak desk, and pulled out a small silver digital voice recorder. It was the exact model I used to carry in my breast pocket to every single hostile client deposition, back before the entire world switched to fancy smartphone apps and cloud storage. Small, stealthy, about the size of a Zippo lighter. I told myself I was just grabbing it out of habit, a rusty old lawyer's instinct kicking in. I figured I would decide later whether I was lying to myself or not. I landed on the tarmac in Atlanta at 7:08 on a muggy Thursday morning. 3 minutes behind schedule because the pilot claimed we hit unexpected headwinds, which is just corporate airline garbage speak for we do not really know what is going on either. I had my worn-out canvas carry-on my leather briefcase, my silver recorder tucked securely over my heart, and 31 years of vicious family law experience sitting heavy in my chest like a block of solid lead. I marched up to the Hertz rental counter and demanded a car. They gave me a dented blue Chevy Malibu that smelled aggressively of cheap pine tree air freshener. It was the kind of harsh chemical scent that immediately makes you wonder what kind of crime scene they are trying to cover up in the upholstery. I gripped the steering wheel, merged onto the chaotic interstate, and drove the final leg to Valdosta. The 2-story house on Whitmore Drive looked exactly the way I remembered it. Flawless beige siding, an oversized 2-car garage, pristine flower beds that shall be maintained with the manic, terrifying intensity of a woman whose entire self-worth relied on the approval of the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. Which, if we are being brutally honest, it probably did. Harper must have been pressing her little face against the glass of the front window the entire morning because the heavy mahogany front door swung wide open before my boots even hit the bottom porch step. She was standing there in her pajamas, faded pink ones covered in little cartoon sloths, her dark, thick, curly hair, the kind of beautiful hair that requires a mother's patience, a ton of love, and 45 solid minutes with a good detangler brush was a wild, matted bird's nest from tossing and turning all night. The skin under her eyes was bruised and swollen purple. She had been crying for hours before she even found the courage to dial my number. She did not say a single word to me. She just launched herself off the porch. I dropped my heavy bags on the concrete and caught her mid-air, wrapping my arms around her tiny frame. She clamped her arms around my neck with the desperate, white-knuckled grip of a drowning victim, needing to make absolutely sure I was a real, solid object and not a hallucination. I felt her chest heave against my shoulder, as she let out this long, ragged, shuddering exhale. It felt like she had been holding that breath in her lungs since midnight. Maybe she really had. "I have got you," I whispered into her messy hair, rocking her back and forth on the sidewalk. "Grandpa has got you tight." We just stood there together on that perfectly swept front walkway for a long time. The neighborhood around us was sickeningly quiet and normal. An automatic lawn sprinkler was aggressively ticking back and forth 2 houses down. A guy in an expensive tracksuit walking a fat beagle gave us a polite, tight-lipped nod as he strutted past. It was the classic cowardly way people in wealthy suburbs acknowledge a strange situation. "I see you having a moment. I respect your privacy enough to look the other way. Carry on, so I do not have to feel uncomfortable." Eventually, the cramping in my back forced me to pull away. I kept my hands on her little shoulders and looked hard into her exhausted face. "Have you put any food in your stomach, kiddo?" She stared at the concrete and shook her head. "Did you manage to sleep at all after we hung up?" She offered a pathetic, unconvincing shrug. "All right then," I said. I scooped up my canvas bag with my left hand and wrapped my big, calloused right hand entirely around hers. "Let's go inside that house. You're going to point out where they hide the frying pans, and I'm going to make you the absolute worst plate of scrambled eggs you have ever tasted in your life, because you know damn well your grandpa cannot cook to save his life." For a split second, the corner of her mouth twitched. She almost smiled, almost. But as soon as I stepped over the threshold and into the foyer, the house started whispering its ugly secrets to me before Harper even had to open her mouth. That is another unbreakable, rusty old lawyer habit that is hardwired into my brain. You always read the room before you ever attempt to read the people inside it, and the living room of that house was screaming at me. There was a meticulously arranged gallery wall of family photographs running the entire length of the main hallway. It was the exact kind of heavily curated, overpriced, custom-framed collection that practically shouts at the guests, "Look at us. Look at how incredibly happy and successful we are." I left my bags by the door and walked down that hallway very, very slowly. I studied every single image with the cold, calculated precision of an investigator at a crime scene. There was Hunter's expensive school portrait from last year, sporting a big, goofy grin showcasing Travis's exact chin. There was a huge canvas of Travis and Shelby standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, with Hunter wedged right between them, all 3 of them laughing like they were in a toothpaste commercial. There was Hunter's shiny Little League baseball trophy sitting proudly on a dedicated floating shelf. There was even a messy finger painting Hunter must have done in kindergarten, professionally matted and framed, hanging right outside the guest bathroom. I stood there and I counted them. There were exactly 11 photographs in that hallway. Do you want to take a wild guess at how many of those carefully selected, prominently displayed photos actually had little Harper in them too? One was her very first day of school photo, but the frame was hung slightly off-center, tucked away near the floorboard, like it had been slapped up there at the absolute last minute as an irritating afterthought. The only other one was a group shot, a staged professional Christmas photograph. But in that picture, Harper was standing at the far left edge of the frame, physically separated by half a step behind the rest of them. She looked like a lost kid from down the street who had accidentally wandered into somebody else's perfect family portrait. I stood there staring at that Christmas picture for a lot longer than I probably should have. Harper shuffled up softly right beside my leg and looked up at it too. "I do not really like that one," she murmured quietly, hugging herself. "Why not, baby?" She shrugged her little shoulders. "I look like I'm just visiting." Over a plate of burnt rubbery scrambled eggs, which were, as I had explicitly promised, a complete culinary disaster, Harper finally started to talk. I let her take the lead. That is another courtroom trick. You never aggressively interrogate a fragile witness. You just gently crack the door open, step back, and let them walk through it on their own. "When exactly did they tell you they were going to Florida?" I asked, pushing my own terrible eggs around the plate. "Tuesday night, right after supper." She kept her eyes glued to her fork. "Daddy said it was a super last-minute trip. He said it was an early present for Hunter's birthday." I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. I knew exactly when Hunter's birthday was. It was 2 entire months away. "I know," Harper whispered, sensing my hesitation without even looking up. "I did not say anything to them, though." "Why not, sweetheart?" Because when I brought it up the last time, about the mountain camping trip, Mama got really mad. She yelled and said I was being a selfish brat, and then Daddy refused to even look at me or talk to me for 3 whole days. Boom. Right there it was, the ugly, undeniable truth rearing its head. I kept my face completely neutral. I locked in my ironclad lawyer's face. The exact blank, unreadable mask I'd practiced in the mirror for 3 decades, so opposing counsel could never see me sweat. What camping trip was that, Harper? In September, they packed up the truck and took Hunter up to the mountains in Tennessee. They told me I had a weekend sleepover at Sadie Lynn's house, but I didn't. Sadie Lynn had the flu, and her mom canceled it on Wednesday. She stated the facts so plainly. Her voice was flat, totally stripped of emotion, like the agonizing hurt had been chewed on and processed so many times in her little brain that it had just worn completely smooth. So I just stayed home here, with Mrs. Patterson from next door. Sadie Lynn, Harper's best friend from the local public elementary school. I immediately filed that detail away in the steel trap of my mind. I did not know it at the time, but the month of September was about to become Exhibit A in the destruction of my son's comfortable life. Harper. I slowly set down my silver fork. Has this exact type of thing happened before, them packing up and going somewhere fun and leaving you behind, more than just this one time? She looked at me across the kitchen island for a long, agonizing moment. It was long enough that I instantly understood she was weighing something massive in her head. She was actively deciding whether or not it was safe to trust me with the crushing weight of her reality. Then she nodded her head, slowly, carefully. It looked like the physical act of nodding actually caused her physical pain. Exactly how many times, sweetheart? She looked up at the popcorn ceiling, her little lips moving as she silently counted to herself. My stomach plummeted towards the floorboards with every single agonizing second of dead air. A lot, she finally whispered, her voice trembling. Grandpa, a lot. I reached my big, wrinkled hand straight across that marble countertop and placed it firmly over her tiny, shaking fingers. Through my shirt, I pressed the record button. I didn't realize it right then, but choking down those awful eggs was going to be the absolute last normal, quiet moment the two of us would share for a very long time. My son Travis finally decided to call my cell phone at exactly noon. I stared at the screen, watched his smiling contact photo flash, and let it go straight to voicemail. He tried again at 12:43 p.m. Then, Shelby tried calling at 1:15 p.m. Finally, at 1:47 p.m., Travis left a rambling, pathetic audio message that I would eventually play on a loudspeaker inside a county courtroom. Let me pause right here and ask you a serious question. If you were sitting in my chair looking at your devastated granddaughter and your own flesh and blood son called you from a theme park after abandoning her, what would you do? Would you scream at him? Would you hang up? Let me know down in the comments, because I had to summon the patience of a saint not to put my fist through the drywall. Travis Hall. My own son. My own flesh and blood. The boy I had spent hours throwing baseballs to in the sweltering Georgia heat. The boy I had driven to early morning SAT prep courses. The boy I had dropped thousands of dollars on for 2 useless semesters of college tuition before he finally figured out what he wanted to do with his miserable life. He called my phone 4 separate times between noon and 1:47 p.m. on that sticky Thursday afternoon. 4 times. And not a single solitary time did he start the voicemail by asking, "Is Harper okay?" I want you to really sit with that dark reality for a second. I replayed all 4 voicemails while Harper was finally catching up on her sleep on the living room sofa. She was buried underneath a heavy gray weighted blanket that she had apparently dragged out of the hallway linen closet all by herself, sometime during the dark, lonely night. I sat alone at Travis's expensive kitchen island with my yellow legal pad, my silver digital recorder, and a steaming mug of black coffee that was doing its absolute best to keep my heart beating, and I listened to the evidence. Message number 1. 12:02 p.m. Hey Dad, it is me. I'm guessing Harper called you crying. I figured she probably might. Look, it is a hell of a lot more complicated than it probably seems to you right now. Okay, just call me back when you get this. More complicated, right. Like advanced differential calculus is complicated. As if leaving an innocent 8-year-old girl home alone in the dead of night while you took her brother to ride roller coasters was some sort of deeply nuanced philosophical family decision that required proper context. Message number 2, 12:43 p.m. Dad, come on. Stop freezing me out. Call me back right now. I know for a fact you are sitting there. No, son. I'm here. There is a massive difference. Message number 3, 1:15 p.m. This one was Shelby's shrill, defensive voice. Harlan, I want you to completely understand that Harper was absolutely safe the entire time. Mrs. Patterson from next door knew to occasionally check in on her, and we left plenty of microwave meals in the fridge, and she had her iPad, and she left an 8-year-old child completely alone with an elderly neighbor on casual standby. She treated that little girl like a damn fern in the window. Like a houseplant you occasionally toss a cup of tap water on and just blindly hope for the best. On my yellow legal pad, I furiously scribbled no emergency contact officially designated. Minor child intentionally abandoned without a legal guardian present on the premises. 31 years of fighting in the trenches of family law folks. The killer instinct comes rushing back fast. Message number 4, 1:47 p.m. It was Travis again. But this specific voicemail was entirely different. This one had blaring, obnoxious background noise echoing behind his voice. Cheery carnival music, massive crowds chattering, the unmistakable, sickening sound of a world-famous theme park. A place literally engineered from the ground up to manufacture magical joy for children. My son was calling me from straight inside the gates of the Magic Kingdom to frantically justify why his adopted daughter was sitting in a dark house hundreds of miles away. Look, Dad, I really need you to not blow this out of proportion and make it into a whole massive thing. Harper is totally fine. Honestly, you being there is it is great. She really loves hanging out with you. This works out perfectly fine for everyone involved. We will be driving back on Sunday. We can all sit down and talk like adults then. Just try to keep her calm, all right? She gets incredibly dramatic about this kind of stuff. She gets dramatic. I set my smartphone down onto the marble counter very, very carefully, afraid I might shatter the screen with my bare hands. She gets dramatic. She is 8 years old, you arrogant fool. She dialed her grandfather at 2 o'clock in the morning because the exact 2 people on this earth who were legally and morally supposed to protect her chose to leave her in the dust. And the only pathetic word he could reach for was dramatic. I picked up my cheap plastic pen, pressed the tip into my legal pad, and wrote 3 specific words, underlining them twice so hard the paper nearly tore. Pattern, documentation, court. Harper finally woke up around 3:30 in the afternoon. Her thick hair was sticking up in every direction. Her sloth pajamas were deeply wrinkled, and she looked approximately 7 years old, while simultaneously carrying the heavy exhaustion of a 40-year-old woman working double shifts. Kids who have been dragged through the mud get that specific haunting look. Old, tired eyes trapped inside a soft, young face. I'd seen that exact look in sterile courtrooms more times than I could ever stomach. "You stayed," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes, sounding like she had fully expected to wake up and find the house empty again. "I gave you my word I would," I replied. She sat up slowly and pulled her knobby knees tight against her chest. "Did Daddy call the phone?" "He did." "Is he really mad at me?" Oh, the sheer heartbreaking audacity of that innocent question. "Is he mad?" "No, baby," I said, forcing my voice to stay gentle. "He is absolutely not mad. How is your stomach feeling?" "Hungry." Then she dropped her volume to a guilty whisper, looking totally embarrassed. "About what happened?" "About what?" "That I called you so late, that I woke you up and cried." She started aggressively picking at a loose gray thread on her weighted blanket. "Mama constantly says I am way too sensitive about things." I took my legal pad and placed it firmly face down on the table. "Harper, look at me right now." She slowly raised her eyes. Calling someone who deeply loves you when you are terrified and completely alone in the dark is not being too sensitive. That is exactly what you are supposed to do. That is the entire fundamental point of having a grandpa in the first place. I paused, leaning forward. And just for the official record, I actually cried in a crowded courtroom once, full-blown ugly tears right in front of a mean old judge. Her brown eyes went as wide as dinner plates. "You really did?" "Sure did. The judge was absolutely not impressed with me, but the jury sure liked it." I stood up, joints popping. "Come on, go get some real clothes on. We are absolutely not sitting inside this depressing house for another second today." "Where are we going?" It was a very good question. I had not entirely figured that logistical part out yet, But I knew in my gut we were not staying inside 4 beige walls stuffed full of lopsided exclusionary photo galleries and the heavy ghosts of every single family vacation she had never been invited on. We are going to go get some late lunch, real, greasy, delicious food, not my burnt eggs. Thank God, she whispered. I let out a loud, booming laugh. It was the very first time I had genuinely smiled since the plane's landing gear touched the tarmac. We ended up driving my rental car to a beat-up local joint called the Rusty Skillet over on Canton Street, right in the heart of downtown Valdosta. It is the exact kind of rugged working-class restaurant that has been sitting on the same corner since before the interstate highway was even poured. They aggressively refuse to update their cracking vinyl booths or their greasy laminated menus on pure, stubborn principle. The whole place constantly smells like roasted coffee beans and ancient bacon grease. There was even a dusty glass display case by the register with actual rotating homemade pies inside it. Harper confidently ordered a massive grilled cheese sandwich dripping with butter and a thick chocolate milkshake. She did it with the firm confidence of a kid who knew she had absolutely earned it. I ordered the heaviest meatloaf on the menu, smothered in brown gravy, because I am 63 years old and I have fully made my peace with my cholesterol. Our waitress was a firecracker of a woman. Her faded plastic name tag read Jolene, which is the absolute most perfect name for a tough, observant woman working a diner like this. She dropped off our drinks aggressively, wiped down the sticky Formica table with a wet rag, and shot Harper a warm, knowing smile. It was the exact secret look adults give each other when they can instantly tell a child has been dragged through hell recently. "You got yourself a pretty good grandpa there, sugar?" Jolene asked her, popping her gum. Harper looked across the table at me, wrapping her hands around her milkshake glass. "Yeah," she said softly. "He is okay." "That is high praise coming from her," I told Jolene. Jolene just winked at us and sauntered off to fetch our food, leaving us in peace. Over that greasy meatloaf, I finally did what I'd been actively avoiding all damn morning. I gently started asking the hard questions, slowly, carefully, framed entirely as a casual diner conversation, absolutely not a hostile cross-examination. But I would be a bold-faced liar if I claimed the ruthless lawyer inside my brain wasn't actively running a quiet, methodical deposition underneath every single bite of mashed potatoes. "Hey, tell me a little bit about your winter school play," I said, casually dipping a fry in ketchup. "The big one back in December. Your homeroom teacher actually emailed me a copy of the program. I saw you had a speaking part." Harper's face immediately did that complicated, painful scrunching thing again. "You really saw that? Ms. Peterson sent it over. She said you did a wonderful job up there." "I had 7 whole lines," she said with the quiet, desperate pride of a kid who had memorized that exact number like it was a lifeline. I was the main narrator. "Were Travis and Shelby sitting in the audience?" The complicated, painful expression locked onto her face. She poked her grilled cheese. "Daddy came to the school for a little bit," she said, carefully choosing her words like walking through a minefield. "But he had to leave the auditorium early because Hunter had an ice hockey practice across town." "And Shelby?" "She stayed in the truck with Hunter." I nodded my head slowly, aggressively, forcing my vocal cords to stay perfectly even. "All right. What about your birthday? That is in March, right? You just turned 8 years old back in March. We had that slice of cake on FaceTime." She said it, simply stating a cold, hard fact. "We stayed at home, just the 4 of us. Daddy bought me a cheap tablet." She paused, sucking on her straw. "I actually heard them arguing in the kitchen the night before. Mama kept saying they should probably throw me a real party with my friends, but Daddy said—" She clamped her mouth shut. "You can tell me, Harper." She stared down into the murky depths of her chocolate milkshake. "Daddy said they had just paid for Hunter's huge birthday party at the Great Wolf Lodge water park last year, and they simply could not afford to do giant, expensive birthdays every single year. He said it was just too expensive." She said that last part in a totally different, slightly pitched tone. It was the careful, mocking voice that children use when they are directly quoting an adult without fully realizing how cruel the words actually are. "So we just ate grocery store cake. Hunter's birthday is in October. Harper's birthday is in March. That is exactly 5 months apart. That falls in 2 completely different fiscal years, 2 entirely different household budgets, and 2 massively different scales of parental celebration." And somehow, magically, the "it is just way too expensive" financial excuse had completely landed on the adopted daughter's side of the ledger. I did not write a single note down on my yellow pad. I did not need to. Some cruelties just burn themselves directly into your memory forever. Harper. I set my fork down on the napkin. I need to ask you one final question, and I need you to look me in the eyes and tell me the absolute unfiltered truth. Even if you think the answer might get somebody in a whole lot of trouble. Do you honestly feel like inside that house you and Hunter are treated exactly the same? A long, suffocating pause settled over the booth. Jolene swung by and topped off my black coffee without asking a single question. The dusty pie case slowly rotated by the register. A sunburned couple sitting in the vinyl booth right behind us started quietly bickering about whether or not to split a slice of cherry pie. "Sometimes," Harper finally whispered. Then, letting out a heavy sigh, she added the crushing truth. "Not really. Can you tell me about just one more specific time that happened? Something different from what you have already told me today?" She thought about it very carefully. That heartbreaking old soul face returned intensely, weighing exactly how much of the ugly truth she could trust me with. "The family photos," she finally said, her voice barely a squeak. "At Christmas time. We drove to that fancy studio over at the big mall, the one with the fake snow backdrop and the matching family outfits." She looked up at my face to make sure I was following the story. "Mama went out and bought matching red knit sweaters for her daddy and Hunter, but she forgot to buy one for me." She paused, taking a ragged breath. "She told me she ordered my size online, but the shipping got delayed and it just did not come in time for the picture." "So what happened when you guys stood in front of the camera?" "I just wore my regular school sweater, the dark blue one." Her voice was impossibly careful and measured. It sounded like she had desperately told herself this fabricated excuse 100 times in the mirror to sand down the sharp, painful edges. "It was okay, though. Sadie Lynn told me I actually looked the best in the photo anyway because I really stood out from the rest of them." That is a damn good friend, the rare kind of friend who desperately searches for the bright side in a pitch-black room. "Where exactly are those studio photos right now?" I asked, my blood turning to ice. "Did they ever get them printed out?" "They are hanging on the wall in our front living room." I instantly thought of that arrogant gallery wall. 11 custom-framed photos. Harper relegated to only 2. I thought of that specific Christmas picture, the little girl shoved to the absolute edge of the camera frame wearing a mismatched blue sweater, standing half a step behind the real family. Exhibit B. We pulled back into the concrete driveway of that suffocating house around 5 o'clock in the evening. On the way back from the Rusty Skillet, I had pulled the Chevy into the parking lot of a sterile, brightly lit local pharmacy. I told Harper she could pick out absolutely anything she wanted from the aisles. She ended up choosing a cheap bottle of glittery pink nail polish, a small bag of generic gummy bears, and one of those thick newsprint activity books filled with word searches and complicated mazes. She made those selections with the agonizing, careful restraint of a child who had been aggressively conditioned not to ask for too much, terrified of becoming a financial burden. Watching her deeply debate whether she was allowed to get the gummy bears broke something fundamental inside my chest. While she happily set herself up at the massive kitchen island, ripping into the candy and fiercely attacking her word search book with a yellow highlighter, I went straight back into the lion's den. I stood in the center of that oppressive main hallway, staring down the arrogant gallery wall. I pulled out my smartphone, wiped the camera lens on my shirt, and systematically photographed every single custom frame. I took wide shots of the entire wall. I took extreme close-ups of the captions. I meticulously documented exactly who was in the spotlight and exactly who was shoved into the dusty margins. Then I pulled the silver voice recorder from my breast pocket, clicked the red button, and held it close to my mouth, speaking in a low, gravelly whisper. "Thursday, approximately 5:15 p.m., Whitmore Drive, Valdosta, Georgia. Subject: familial photographic documentation in the Hall residence. There are exactly 11 framed photographs displayed in the primary high-traffic hallway. The minor child Harper appears in only 2. In Exhibit A, she is visually and physically separated from the primary family unit. In Exhibit B, the Christmas studio portrait, she is wearing mismatched clothing entirely inconsistent with the rest of the family, strongly suggesting she was deliberately excluded from the original planning of the photographic session. Both of these images are strategically placed near the floorboards in low visibility positions relative to the massive portraits of the biological son. I clicked the machine off, slipped it back into my pocket, and walked back into the kitchen. I sat down on a heavy oak bar stool across from Harper. She was frowning fiercely at her puzzle book, her little tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth in tremendous concentration. "Grandpa?" she mumbled around a mouthful of gummy bears, not even looking up from the page. "Is the word parallel spelled with 2 L's in the middle, or just 1, 2 in the middle, baby, 1 at the very end?" She aggressively circled the word with her yellow highlighter, grinning triumphantly. But then the smile instantly vanished. The heavy, dark reality of the house crashed back down over her shoulders. She put the marker down and looked at her sticky fingers. "Are you going to make me go back to them when they drive home on Sunday?" I stopped breathing for a second. She asked the question so casually. She sounded completely resigned, like she had already accepted that the answer would be yes. She had built an entire psychological fortress inside her brain just to prepare for the inevitable heartbreak of being handed right back to her abusers. "I do not have the complete answer to that just yet," I told her honestly, leaning across the marble counter. "But I need you to listen to me very carefully, Harper. Whatever happens next, whatever I decide to do, or whatever any arrogant adult in your life decides to do, I need you to know deep in your bones that you are never an afterthought. You are not an inconvenience to be left behind, and you sure as hell are not just a blue sweater in somebody else's perfect Christmas photograph." I kept my voice rock steady. 31 years of courtroom steel. "You are the whole damn point, Harper. Do you understand me?" She stared at me across the island for a long, agonizing minute. Her little chin wobbled just once. Then she swallowed hard and forced it to stop. "Okay," she whispered softly. "Okay," I echoed back. She went right back to aggressively highlighting her word search. I went right back to my yellow legal pad. I did not know it at that exact moment, but Sunday afternoon was not going to go anything like my son was planning. Travis finally worked up the nerve to call me again at exactly 7:52 p.m. The sun had finally dipped below the Georgia pines, casting long, dark shadows across the flawless suburban lawns. This time I pressed the green button and held the phone to my ear. "Dad." The overwhelming relief in his voice was immediate and sickening. Then he shifted into a cautious, probing tone. "How is she?" "She is fine," I answered, my voice carrying the warmth of a frozen lake. "She is right here. She is safe and fed." I let a 2-second pause hang in the dead air. Absolutely no thanks to anyone currently riding a roller coaster in Orlando, Florida. Total deafening silence on the line. "Dad, look. Travis." I barked his name the exact way I used to bark at hostile witnesses during cross-examination, when I desperately needed them to understand they were no longer engaging in a polite conversation. They were walking into a buzzsaw. "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to give me a direct, unfiltered answer." I heard him swallow hard through the receiver. "Okay. When was the absolute last time little Harper was included in a major family vacation?" The pause that followed was agonizing. It stretched out for 10, maybe 15 seconds, and the sheer length of that guilty silence told me absolutely everything I needed to know. I had him dead to rights. We took her to," he stammered, cleared his throat and tried again. "Last summer we all drove down to..." Another brutal stop. He was suffocating on his own lies. "It has been a really hard year financially, Dad. You just do not understand the pressure I'm under right now." "The mountain camping trip," I stated coldly, dropping the hammer. "September, up in Tennessee. Hunter went. Harper stayed home." Silence. "The professional Christmas photos." I continued twisting the knife. "She was shoved to the back wearing a blue sweater while the 3 of you wore matching red knits." More suffocating silence. "Her 8th birthday was a cheap grocery store cake eaten at this kitchen island," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Hunter's birthday was a massive, expensive weekend blowout at the Great Wolf Lodge water park." Complete, absolute silence now. The heavy, crushing kind of silence that has physical weight to it. "Travis," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "A surgical scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I'm not calling you a monster right now. I'm simply asking you to look in the mirror. When you look at the cold, hard facts I just listed out loud to you, what exactly do you see?" He didn't answer me for a very long time. I could hear the faint, obnoxious sound of a theme park parade playing through the phone in the background. When he finally found his voice, it was entirely different. It was stripped bare. It lacked all the arrogant suburban entitlement from the previous voicemails. It was the pathetic, hollow voice of a man who had finally run entirely out of road. "I do not know how it got like this," he whispered, his voice cracking. And right there it was. It was not a legal defense. It was not a valid excuse. It was simply a weak, cowardly man staring directly at his own reflection and realizing he was absolutely terrified of the person looking back at him. I took a slow, deep breath. "We will finish this conversation on Sunday. All of us, face to face." "Okay," he mumbled, sounding like a beaten dog. "Okay, Dad." I hung up the phone. I sat perfectly still in the pristine kitchen of his massive house, sitting at his expensive marble table drinking his black coffee. Then I flipped open my heavy laptop, cracked my knuckles, and began formally drafting the legal petition that would rip his perfect life completely apart. Let me pause the story right here and ask you, what would you do if your own child confessed to being this cruel? Would you try to fix them? Or would you take the grandchild and walk away forever? Tell me down in the comments, because this next part is where the fireworks finally start. Sunday afternoon rolled around, sticky and thick with humidity. Travis and Shelby walked through the heavy mahogany front door at exactly 4:17 p.m. They looked absolutely ridiculous. They were dragging expensive rolling luggage, sporting bright red sunburns on their shoulders, and carrying a handful of cheap plastic souvenirs. But worse than that, they were wearing the fragile, frantic smiles of two guilty people who had spent the last 4 days aggressively pretending that everything was totally fine. Harper was sitting at the exact same spot at the kitchen island, fiercely focused on a new page in her word search book. When the front door banged open, she didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She kept her eyes glued to the cheap paper. Seeing her actively ignore him hurt Travis significantly more than a punch to the jaw. I watched the realization physically land on his sunburned face like a heavy iron gavel. "Hey there, baby girl." Travis started, his voice dripping with fake, overcompensated enthusiasm. "She can hear you perfectly fine, Travis," I said, stepping out from the shadows of the hallway and crossing my arms over my chest. "Whether or not she chooses to acknowledge your existence is entirely her own choice." Shelby's eyes immediately cut over to me, flashing with defensive anger. "Harlan, we really should go into the other room and discuss this privately as adults." "Oh, we absolutely will," I agreed smoothly, offering a cold, terrifying smile. "But before we do that, Travis, I need you to take a look at what I'm holding." He frowned, dropping his suitcase handle. He walked cautiously toward me. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. It was secured tightly with one of those little metal clasps, the universal terrifying symbol that whatever is inside this package is strictly official, legally binding, and is about to ruin your afternoon. "What the hell is this?" he asked, staring at the brown paper like it was a live grenade. "That," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings, "is a formal petition for emergency de facto custodianship of the minor child Harper Hall. It was officially filed and processed first thing Friday morning down at the county courthouse." I let those words hang in the air for exactly 3 seconds, watching the blood rapidly drain out of both of their faces. "I have been incredibly busy while you two were busy riding the teacups." Shelby gasped, her manicured hand flying up to cover her mouth. "You cannot possibly do that." "I already did, sweetheart," I snapped back, not breaking eye contact with my son. 31 years of practicing family law in this state, I did not forget a single damn trick in the book. Travis stood frozen in the center of the foyer. His hands were shaking visibly. He peeled open the metal clasp of the envelope with agonizing slowness. It was the exact pathetic way that people open legal documents when they already know deep down that the words printed on the pages are going to permanently destroy their lives. His eyes frantically darted back and forth across the thick black legal text of the first page. He read the citations. He read the list of attached audio and photographic exhibits, and then his knees simply gave out. He collapsed backward, sitting flat on his ass right there on the expensive hardwood floor of his perfect hallway. I did not feel a single ounce of triumph. I did not feel happy or victorious. I just felt incredibly tired and absolutely undeniably certain that I was doing the right thing. And certainty is a hell of a lot better than triumph. "Dad," his voice was a hollow, breathless rasp. "I have the digital audio recordings, Travis. I said quietly, stepping closer to him, towering over his pathetic frame. I have the time-stamped photographs. I have a detailed ledger of the dates, every single abandoned trip, every single ignored birthday, every single winter school play with an empty folding chair where two loving parents should have been proudly sitting. I have established a pattern of deliberate emotional neglect so undeniably clear and well-documented that I could present this evidence to any blind judge in the state of Georgia and win full custody of her before they even serve lunch. Shelby finally shattered. She dropped her designer purse and started violently sobbing into her hands. I casually reached over to the console table, pulled a tissue from the decorative box and handed it to her because I am a ruthless lawyer, not a monster. I'm not doing this just to maliciously destroy your life, I said, looking down at my broken son. I'm doing this because a terrified 8-year-old girl asked me why at 2 o'clock in the morning, and absolutely nobody inside this gigantic, expensive house had the guts to give her a decent answer. Travis slowly tilted his head up. His eyes were bloodshot and overflowing with tears. I know, he whispered so quietly I almost did not catch it. I know, Dad. Are you going to hire a shark and try to fight me in court over this? It was the longest, heaviest silence of my entire life. It felt longer than waiting for a murder verdict from a sequestered jury. Slowly, painfully, Travis shook his head from side to side. He surrendered. Right there on the floor of his perfect, miserable house, the war was over. The official custody hearing took place exactly 14 days later under the harsh fluorescent lights of the county courthouse. The air in those old municipal buildings always smells exactly the same. A heavy, suffocating mixture of lemon floor polish, rotting paper files, and the stale, nervous sweat of people whose lives are about to permanently change. Judge Loretta Boone was the one presiding over the docket that morning. She is a terrifying, silver-haired force of nature who possesses absolutely zero tolerance for any kind of courtroom nonsense, and she has always had razor-sharp, infallible instincts when it comes to the welfare of children. She is the kind of judge who looks straight through your skin and reads the sins written right on your bones. To his absolute credit, and it might be the only decent thing the boy has done in a year, Travis showed up to the hearing entirely alone. He did not hire a slick, aggressive defense lawyer to drag us through the mud. He did not bring Shelby to sit in the gallery and put on a crying act for the court. He just walked through those heavy double doors wearing a wrinkled, poorly fitting suit looking like a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had gone to Disney World 2 weeks prior. He was sworn in and he sat in the witness box for exactly 11 minutes. He didn't lie. He didn't deflect the blame. He spoke quietly, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls, stripped of all the usual suburban drama. He openly admitted on the permanent legal record that he deeply loved his daughter, but that he had completely and utterly failed her in fundamental ways, that he was still desperately trying to understand himself. He looked Judge Boone directly in the eye and confessed that his own father, me, could give that little girl the exact things he clearly lacked the capacity to provide: total consistency, unwavering priority, and a permanent front-row seat to her own life. It was the most brutally honest, agonizing 11 minutes I've ever witnessed in my 31 years of practicing family law. Watching your own flesh and blood completely surrender his parental rights is a specific kind of heartbreak that does not ever really heal. But it had to be done. The rot had to be cut out so the tree could survive. Judge Loretta Boone did not even need to recess into her chambers to deliberate. She slammed her heavy wooden gavel down onto the sounding block with a crack like a rifle shot. She granted full permanent de facto custody to me, Harlan Vance, effective immediately. I slowly exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding in my lungs for 2 whole weeks. I turned my head and looked over at the petitioner's table. Harper was sitting right next to my hired bulldog of a lawyer, Maxine Gable. Harper was wearing her absolute best dark purple velvet dress. Her little hands were folded neatly in her lap. She did not burst into tears. She did not jump up and down or cheer. She just looked across the aisle directly into my eyes and she gave me a nod. It was the exact same small, devastatingly serious nod she had given me at the kitchen island weeks ago. It was the look of 2 trench warfare survivors confirming that the treaty had finally been signed. She finally truly believed that she was safe. We packed up her remaining belongings into the trunk of my car, left the keys to the Valdosta house on the kitchen counter, and hit the highway. On the long drive back to my dusty property in Waycross, the cab of the truck was peacefully quiet for a long time. The endless rows of tall Georgia pines blurred past the passenger window, looking perfectly ordinary and bathed in the rich golden light of the late afternoon sun. Suddenly, Harper shifted in her seat. She unbuckled her seatbelt just enough to lean over the center console. "Grandpa?" she asked softly. "Yeah, baby. I'm listening." She chewed on her bottom lip, her dark brown eyes studying the dashboard. "Am I your first choice?" I didn't hesitate. I didn't blink. I kept my steady eyes firmly on the open road ahead of us, gripping the worn leather of the steering wheel. "You are my absolute only choice, Harper," I told her, my voice thick with absolute certainty. "You always were." She reached out across the console and placed her tiny, warm hand directly over my wrinkled hand, resting on the gear shift. She did not say another word for the rest of the drive. That touch was enough. That was absolutely everything. Well, my friends, that brings us to the end of the line for this chapter. If spending 31 years in the brutal trenches of family law has taught me anything, it is this simple, undeniable truth about karma. You cannot treat people like they are disposable and expect them to stick around to keep you warm. If you consistently put the people who love you at the very bottom of your priority list, the universe has a funny way of making sure you eventually wake up in an empty, silent house with nothing but the crushing weight of your own regrets for company. Travis and Shelby chose their perfectly curated plastic life over a beautiful little girl, and now they have to live with the ghosts of their own selfishness every single day. I want to genuinely thank you for pulling up a chair and listening to an old man tell his story today. It means the absolute world to me to share this journey with you. Before you click away, please make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss out on the next story. It really helps keep the lights on around here. And I'm going to ask you the same question I asked at the very beginning of the video, because I truly want to know, what city are you watching this from, and what time is it on your clock right now? Drop it down in the comments section below, along with what you would have done if you were in my shoes. I promise I read every single one of them. If you feel like supporting the channel a little extra and buying this tired grandpa a hot cup of coffee, you can use the donate feature right below the video. If not, that is perfectly fine too. Just go ahead and click on the next video popping up on your screen right now for another story of real, raw karma. Take care of your loved ones, folks, and I will see you in the next one.